Hello, everyone. Excuse me. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome along to this first Cloud Bytes TV Sandbox session of the year of 2026. We had to cancel one a couple of weeks ago because I had lost my voice, as you might be able to still hear. So apologies if I cough a little bit throughout. I still have some lingering effects. It is just me this week. Peter is unfortunately otherwise engaged with some work stuff, so it is just myself. So yeah, welcome along, Happy New Year, and thank you for joining us today. So as it is just me, there'll be a little bit less preamble this week, and we can dive straight in to our session on GraphQL. So as you join us, please say hello in the comments. Let me know where you are watching and joining us from. And yeah, let's dive in and see what we are working with today. So today's session is focused on GraphQL. And the reason we wanted to talk about GraphQL today is because it's an exciting piece of kit to work with in general, and B, in the Spring 26 release, which is coming out in the next few weeks into all your orgs, there is some exciting enhancements involving mutations for the API. So make sure that you to keep you kind of abreast with them so you can see it. We want to show you a little bit of how you can both use GraphQL first of all to retrieve some data, which is something you've been able to do for a while now. Talk about some of the benefits of that, some of the downsides of that, and then also show you how you can use GraphQL to create some data. So do a mutation. You can do creates, updates, and deletes. We're just going to do creates today and go from there. So I've already gone away because it's just me this week. I've gone away and built something. We're going to try and rebuild it in the session today. It is already uploaded into the GitHub repository. So if you are wanting to follow along at home, you can follow along at home, or you can just keep an eye out for this later on. But all of the information is available in the GraphQL branch on our repository. So let's start off by just talking about what GraphQL is. So GraphQL is graph query language, and it is effectively a way of doing queries for REST APIs. And so REST APIs are very good. I'm sure everyone's familiar with them. If you've been following along on the sessions for a while now, you've probably seen us use some REST APIs. We use the Pexels API, for example, to get some data and show that. But the issue with REST APIs is they tend to do a single resource, and they can involve a lot of information. So if, for example, you want to get a record with a specific ID, you do so, but you then get the entire record, which can, in certain orgs be a lot more data than you're looking for if all you want to is kind of like the first name and the last name field. Equally, if you want to retrieve lots of different sets of data, so say you wanted to retrieve an account, a contact, some opportunities, you'd have to go and call a query endpoint to get all of that data at once and run through that. So you'd have to remember the SOQL format for that. And equally, if you wanted to retrieve two different objects at once that didn't have a relationship, you couldn't do that. You'd have to use the composite API. So GraphQL was designed by Facebook to make it easy for you to retrieve and work with data in a REST API using JavaScript. So it was really written originally and devised originally to help make it easy for React to start working with data. It uses a very JavaScript style syntax. So you can find out more about GraphQL in general from graphql.org. So let me just start sharing my screen. And so yeah, if you head to graphql.org, you can see here that there's all the big companies are using it. You can find out a lot more about what GraphQL is and how it works. And obviously, you can get different information from different pieces of from different databases. And that's one of the things, just I suppose to hit on briefly as well, is excuse me, GraphQL is really good at kind of doing that separation of concerns, and that in the when you're calling one of the problems with calling Salesforce is that you have to know about Salesforce's data structure, and we kind of want to abstract away the knowledge of what the database system is. And so GraphQL is a really good way of doing that, to abstract that database system away, to make it easy for you to understand and work with different types of data as you go in there. So what I want to do, I'm just going to change the layout here, as it's just me today. I wonder if that layout might be there. That might be a bit better for everyone to be able to see more on screen. Again, welcome along. Let us know where you're joining from. Say hello as we're going through, and apologies if I keep on having to soothe my throat and the lingering effects of the cold that cancelled us the other week. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. So we're going to get to this end state. So this is this is one I made earlier, where I built this little component here called associated contacts. And all it does is it retrieves a bunch of contacts associated with a particular account and displays the name and the email address. It's not overly clever. It's not anything fantastic, but it's a good little demo example to show all the different aspects of what we're going to try and do today. We can also then create a new contact. So I'm going to create Gomez Adams. Okay, and I'm going to hit save. And that save there is using the mutation GraphQL part of it's using the mutations portion of the GraphQL library from Salesforce, and it's creating a new contact, and then we are coming back here and updating this list. So we're going to see three things today, hopefully. Excuse me. Number one, we're going to see the creation of, so we're going to build out a component that uses GraphQL to retrieve contacts where we have a specific account ID. And that's something that there isn't a standard Salesforce API to do. One of the things we'll kind of talk about as we go through is when to use GraphQL and when not. And one of the benefits here of using GraphQL is you can do your query without having to call a wire method, without having to call an Apex controller where you've written a query method to do it. Okay, so there's less code for you to manage and maintain. The second thing we're going to do is we're then going to create our modal window that you just saw to go away, and we're going to do a mutation to create our contact record. And then the final thing we're going to do is look at the refresh API, so that when we've updated it, we can call and we can get it to refresh and just re-instantiate this data. Now, overall, I'm just going to check here. The JavaScript for this is going to be about, hopefully, around 120 lines all told altogether. And a lot of that, as you will see, is spacing and indentation and trying to make it pretty. One of the things we'll do today as well is just talk through some of the nuances with GraphQL. So GraphQL is a fantastic tool, and Salesforce has done well. They've recently updated from, I can show you here. So there's an old GraphQL adapter, which was the UI GraphQL API adapter, to the new GraphQL adapter. There are differences in functionality here. The GraphQL adapter has the mutations options. It has the ability to just refresh as an option, so it passes down a refresh method for you, whereas the old method had a refresh call you had to make that was separate, and it also didn't have the mutations API. So there's a few bits and pieces there for us to be aware of, but you can find documentation on all this, and we'll talk through some of the nuances in here as we go. So now that we've seen that demo, I have a brand new Scratch org here that is completely independent and different, and we can get started in building out our first components. So let me just bring down my brand new Scratch org here. Let me do that again and actually move the code window. Cool. And here we are. It's an empty VS Code. Yeah, nothing in there. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a Lightning Web Component for our contact list, and we're going to call it contact list. And I'm going to try and code this along kind of off the top of my head. There are certain things that we will kind of be using some of the existing code for, but I want to show you the thought process as we go through this in general as well. So this is contact list. Now a contact list is going to need a couple of things. So first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need the API import, because we're going to want to get the record ID. Okay, and on a component, if you have the record ID parameter on there, when you drop that component onto the page, on a Lightning record page, it will pull in the record ID. So nice and easy for us. So we can do that. And then what we're going to want to have is a list of records, which is going to be all of our contact records that we're going to iterate over. Okay. And once we've got those two, we are pretty much good to go. So that's our very basic data we're going to need in there. So let's go to our HTML. And what I'm just going to do for our HTML really quick is I'm going to create probably a card layout for us. So let's just do a Lightning card. I'm going to give it a title that says, I'm going to call this, we're going to put in related contacts here rather than associated, so that I can just differentiate between the two screens, because I am definitely going to go screen blind at some point. And then what we're going to do is I'm just going to put out the record ID on screen here, okay? So that we can just see it and check that it's coming through. And in our meta XML file, I'm just going to go in, and this is one of those areas I am going to copy and paste just because it's going to save a bit of typing. But this is just exposing it on the Lightning record page layout. Okay, nothing. Hopefully everyone's seen this far before in building a Lightning web component and getting it out there. So we hit save. We're going to press hide. It's going to change this anyway, which is useful. And if we go here and edit our page, we have our contact list, and we can add that. There you go, and you can see it's already popping in our record ID in there. So let's save, let's activate, make it the org default, and voila. We should now be good to go. There we go, we can see that data. So I'm just going to go in quickly as well into the setup menu. I'm just going to turn on debug mode for my user. I forgot to do it a minute ago. And we could work with local dev here. Debug mode's already on, which is awesome. We could work, I could have seen that there. We can work with local dev here to go through and test this, but we're just going to use debug mode for now. We're not doing anything overly clever that's going to need us to do that. So first thing we want to do is go away, and we want to start retrieving our contact records using this record ID. So in order to do that, we're going to use the query GraphQL endpoint. And there are two portions of the query GraphQL kind of setup we need. So we're going to import GQL, which is the graph query language kind of preprocessor, I'm going to call it, for processing our text string. It processes our query, and then we're going to have GraphQL, which is a GraphQL function from our module, and it's from Lightning. See, one of the interesting things here is the auto-suggest will try and suggest the old module, which will cause headaches. He says, having spent some time this morning dealing with said headaches. So GQL and GraphQL. Okay, so we've got our imports. And GraphQL here is a function. It's a function we can call with a wire. So let's import wire at the top. And you would use the GraphQL wire function here in the same way you would any other wire function. So I'm going to wire it. We're going to call GraphQL. Make sure we spelled it correctly. And then this function takes in a number of parameters. So just put our closing semicolon there, and then we can start going through it. So first thing it takes in, as you probably saw a second ago, as it tried to pop up. Now let's do this, and just put our property in a second. GraphQL result handler, and this returns an object with data, with errors, and with result in it. And result is that new addition I was about that will allow us to do, sorry, not result, refresh. That'll allow us to do that refresh in a minute. Voila. Okay, so we're going to leave that there for now, but that kind of tidies our code up for us. So the first thing it takes in is a query parameter. So our query parameter is going to use the GQL interpolator or processor, and we're going to pass it a string that is going to go through and process. Okay. Now, the format for these queries. For a query, you have to give it a query. Let me just see if I can turn off this auto suggest. Where is it? Yeah, no, that's great. It's Agentforce vibes, I think, that's now doing it. Disable Agentforce vibes. Oh, that's bad. So you have to give it a query, and we're going to give that query a name. So we're going to call that related contacts. Okay, and in that we're going to pass in a parameter as a variable called account ID, and it's going to have a type of ID. We are all aware the account ID field has an ID data type. Okay, we are then going to call the UI API module within that. We're going to call the query action, and then we're going to define our query. And what we're going to do is we're going to be querying the contact object. So this is the object name you are querying here. If it was a custom object, it'd be $_c, but it's not. And you're then going to put in your filters. So we're going to say where, and then we want the account ID, and the operator we're doing is equals. I'm going to use the $ID variable we've passed in. Okay, and we just have to make sure all of our brackets add up. This is one of the things that I find quite infuriating, if I'm honest, about using GraphQL, is the number of times I get the incorrect number of curly braces and curly brackets everywhere, just where you're not. Yeah, sometimes the autocomplete helps, sometimes it doesn't. So once you define the object and any filters, and in these filters here, you can add in all sorts of things. So if I go over here to the adapter, see, where does it have the filters? If I go into here, query records, and you can have filter results, so you can see all the different field operations you can do here. Equals, not equals, less than, greater than, blah, 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 blah. You can combine them. You can do polymorphic relationship filters. Also do semi-join and anti-join. So if the two objects aren't related, you can do semi-joins and anti-joins, where they use kind of results from the primary query. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do in here. But for us, we are doing something a bit more simple. So we're just querying where our account ID field equals the value in our account ID. And then we want to say what value you want to get. Now, this is a graph. GraphQL, as the name suggests, is a graph, and a graph typically has edges and nodes. So an edge is a relationship, and a node is a data point on there. Now, we are only getting edges and nodes from the contact objects. This is a little bit more simple, but for each one of the edges we have, each one of the records in effect, also each one of the relationships we have that we are navigating across, for each node or record, we want to get the ID, and we want to get the name. And when we're getting fields that aren't the ID, we want to tell them we want to get either the value or the display value. Value is typically what I use. Display value is good if you have a field that has some formatting that has a display value difference. So like an account, an address field, I think gives you a different display value back. Number fields, etc., etc. So if they got formatting on them. And then we're going to do value there. And that is our query written. So there's a lot of like bits in this. And this is kind of, again, when I have some, formatting it like this is overkill. Yeah, it's not overkill. Formatting it like this is the way that I've found easiest to help me read, because, as I say, you're forever kind of missing brackets and missing items on there. But having it in this view works pretty well. You can then collapse it down once you're happy and kind of clean it up with your linter if you need to. But for this, we're going to keep it like that. Now, we're doing something special here, which is using the kind of variables option. What is the variables option? So we're passing in a variable here of account ID. So the next thing we need to do is define what our variables are. And the way we do that is we use, the variables parameter, and we tell it to get it from $variables. Now, this is effectively calling a dynamic reference, and that is going to retrieve our data using a get method on a property called variables. So we're going to do get variables, and we're going to return the account ID equal to this .record ID. Okay. Now, again, we could tidy this up by having record ID equals blank there, or we can have a null check if it's identified, but this will work for us. So this is going to return us the account ID for us, the record ID that's been passed in from the account record page. We're going to put it into this object where we have the account ID in there, and we pass it into these input variables, and it will retrieve that account ID there for us. Okay. So we're looking pretty good so far. And then what we want to do is we want to process our data here. So we've got our records. Let's make sure we correct that to records, otherwise we'll come up a cropper in a minute. And what we want to do with our records is say, well, first of all, if we have data, then we want to process it. If we have errors, then we want to console.error the errors. Okay. Again, in production, you would probably do much better error handling than that and figure out if there was a particular issue or display a message. But for this example, the important part really isn't that. We then have to go across all of the edges that we have, and then for each node, process it. And if you were going across multiple different edges within your graph, you have multiple edges on and sub edges on a node. This is very simple for us, so it's a very simple kind of review to go through. So what we're going to do is this .records, which is our record list we're going to work on, and that's going to be data. So it's the data we get, the UI API property within that, the query property within that. So again here, UI API query, the contact property within that, the edges property within that, and then what we're going to do is we're going to map them. And what we're going to say is for each edge, map it to edge.node. Okay, so that's just going to put out a list of all of the node values on there for us. The other thing we're going to do now, just to make this easy, is do this underscore refresh. And we'll use that later on, but I'm just going to do it now before I forget. I'm going to add another property on here, which is going to be called underscore refresh. Okay. And that should get us up and running with getting our data and populating it. Okay. So this isn't overly difficult. There's nothing too crazy about writing this query. As I say, you can query child records below as well. You can query parent records. You can query using results of another query. So we could retrieve, say we retrieve the contact here or an account here. We could then query the contact separately. We could query another object that also uses the account. You can do a lot of flexible things here with the GraphQL API. So it is really useful, it is really powerful, and definitely worth investigating. The other kind of big things to talk about here before we jump on is there is no way of me retrieving a list of records in a standard way in Lightning Web Components. I can't go away and just say, yeah, we have the UI record API. So if I'm using Lightning Record Edit Form or Lightning Record View Form or Lightning Record Form, we can go in and we can provide some fields, retrieve some data using an ID, and that is perfect. That works brilliantly when you have one record that you are retrieving the data for. When you're retrieving a lot of data and it's not kind of a list view or something like that, something like this where it's related, this is a really good option for allowing you to just retrieve the data you want. Okay. And the nice thing here is that I haven't had to go away. The other way I could do this is I could write an Apex controller. On that controller, I could have an Aura enable method. That method could have a query in it that allows me to pass in the account ID, and then goes away and processes that and does that. But again, I then have to kind of wait, load up, do that call. I'm then going to test the Apex. Whereas here, I'm kind of removing the need for me to do that and just doing it all client side. So let's remove our record ID here and let's just start building out our card real quick as well. None of this, again, is going to be anything too crazy for us. In fact, I'm just going to copy the code across, honestly, because we can walk through it quickly. It's not that clever. So what we're doing is we have a template and we're doing a for each across our records. And for each record, excuse me, we are creating a div with some padding around it, and we are putting a small heading with a name value and a formatted email output with the email value. That is it. Nothing complex, nothing clever. So if I hit save on this now and wait for that to deploy, which was very quick, too quick to even allow me to sip my coffee properly, we're going to come over here, and if I refresh the page, it's not going to display anything for us. So we have an error somewhere. Do we have an error somewhere? Let's just give that another refresh, see why it wasn't working. It is working. We have no contacts. Always a simple reason for it to not work. So let me just add in a quick test contact. I'm going to create Walter Mellon. And I'm going to give Walter the email w.mellon@acme.live. Cool. Save. And if I refresh the page now where we have a contact record available to us, we can see that populates up. It's a bit about the scope of today's chat, but you can also set up so that you can have that refresh occur when different actions occur on there. So step number 1 is done. We are now querying using GraphQL to retrieve a set of data related to the account and displaying it. That is pretty nice. Now, again, I just want to kind of pop back here and talk about how quick and easy this is. The template code, dead easy, but here, okay, I've got it spaced over 40 odd lines of code. But that's pretty much mainly because I like to space things out so I can read them and make them legible. But the actual work to do this is very quick and easy. And again, we're not having to write an Apex controller here. We're not having to do anything with that. This is all done from the Salesforce side. So, excuse me, it's tuned, it's optimized, and it's really easy for us to kind of work with. So I'm a big fan of this. Let me know in the comments if you've used, well, first of all, make sure to say hi again, and let me know in the comments if you've been using GraphQL or not. But yeah, I really quite like this as a way of going away and retrieving some data to display on a page to start off with. So we've got some data being retrieved and being displayed on our page. The next step we want to do then is kind of move on to doing the mutation side of things where we can create some data. Now, this is where we're going to jump over to the documentation and talk a little bit about some of the nuances that I have banged my head against earlier. So one of the things with the GraphQL modules and kind of the Salesforce documentation on them is there is 2 sets of documentation here. So GraphQL is an API. It is an API that Salesforce have separate to Lightning Web Components, and then there is an implementation that allows you to use it in Lightning Web Components. There's a module you can have the imports in. Okay. Now, the documentation for this module is slightly sparse, is what I'm going to say, is the polite way of mentioning it. So it doesn't have a lot of details in here. There's a little simple example. I mean, it's no more simple than the example we've got, but it's not it's not like they're going to give you hundreds of examples. For the mutation example here, Salesforce have a couple of examples for different resources. It talks about how you do it. In effect, you're writing another query, you're calling a method and waiting for the result. Nothing too crazy there. The interesting thing you've got here is that Salesforce has this idea of the operation name. So the operation name is the name of the mutation operation you want to perform. That is a fixed and defined list. And I didn't realize this earlier on. It just says here, instead of using shorthand syntax mutation, blah, 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 use create case or update contact or whatever. There is a fixed list of these you can actually use. It is not listed here as far as I could see when I was reading through that, but it is a fixed list and there is a pattern. To find out about that fixed list and that pattern, you should go and read the GraphQL API documentation, which is a little bit more abstract and high level. It doesn't focus obviously on LWC, but it does contain the details. So you can see here in the mutation schema that mutation schema has different UI, different input types, and it has different operation types. So the UI API mutations type has 3 fields: record create, record delete, and record update for each object type accessible to the user. So for the account object, there is the UI API mutations, and then there is the account create type, which has an account create input type, and then you provide it a payload. If you don't use this pattern, and I'll show you what this pattern looks like in detail in a minute, you will get unbridled errors. It just doesn't. One of the problems here is that the error logging is not superb for this. So if I just come back here real quick, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to purposely break this. I'm going to delete. I'm going to add in an extra bracket here. Okay. Now, this is quite difficult as a bunch of brackets to read anyway. For anyone who is old enough to remember kind of the pyramid of callback hell, this is what this reminds me of. Now, if we then refresh this page, it will error for us. And it will error in the background for us. And it won't retrieve any data. And the reason being is that is just not working properly. Now, where's my errors? It hasn't actually put the errors out. That's wonderful. So see, it just fails silently, which is even worse. It's not. They're just not. Oh, there you go. Unquoted promise, syntax error, unexpected, curly brace. So it does tell you there's an unexpected curly brace, but you have to then go away and start trawling through it and figuring out where. If you removed, say I called it email X, let's just try that and start doing this. You'll see that, as I say, the errors are just not as, in my mind, they're not as clear and easy as it is working with Apex. When we're working with Apex and Sockwall in that instance, it is just very easy. So here we're getting 2 one-store errors for type error cannot read something of undefined. We're getting internal error in GraphQL adapter, but that's it. We don't get any more details about why there is an internal error. We just get told there is an internal error in the GraphQL adapter. So you have to be very, very careful here to make sure that your naming is correct. If you're working with namespace stuff, you have to keep the namespace in. There's just a lot of little nuances like that just make it fragile, is what I will say at the moment. And you can, I will tell you that I have spent a large amount of time over the past 6 months debugging where I've added an extra bracket or something's got a wrong reference or something's just in there. Okay, some of that's just me being being a moron, but in general, it's just not as easy to debug some of these things. So back to the mutations part. As I mentioned, when we execute a mutation, we have to follow this schema. So if we don't follow this schema, so for example, the account create schema for an account, it will error and you just won't get a helpful error back. So very, very important you follow this through and you understand these representations. But I think the best way to understand it is to see an example. So let's hop back over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a modal. And for those who haven't seen how you can do some nice mobile stuff in Lightning Web Components, this is a good opportunity for that, which I think is always nice as well. So if we create a new Lightning Web Component, and we're going to call it create contact modal. Now, one of the things that Salesforce provide for us to work with modals is the modal option. I'm just going to remove that. We're going to want API in a second, but we're going to import Lightning modal. Lightning modal from, and it's Lightning / modal. So we import the Lightning modal module, and we are going to, instead of using Lightning element, we are going to use Lightning modal. Now this allows us a bunch of excuse me, helper functions, a bunch of helper properties, and styling that is just going to make this much easier to work with in creating a modal. And yeah, it's something that I don't think a lot of people realize Salesforce provide, or a lot of people haven't used yet, just to kind of make their UIs a little bit more snappy, a little bit more snazzy and useful. So for us to create our concept, we're going to need our account ID to be passed in. So we're going to do that like this. So we have our account ID API property, and that means that can be passed in. We're also going to need a first name, a last name, and we're going to need an email as well. Okay, all the important details. So let's create a very basic form. For this, we can get rid of that. We don't need that anymore. And if we go here into our form, now because we're using a modal, as I mentioned, there's some nice slots it gives us and some different pieces we can implement. So the first thing it gives us is a slot called title. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to put a Lightning modal header in that. That's going to style our modal header nicely. And the label is going to be create related contact. Okay, nice and easy. Cool. Then we're going to have a body. Okay, and in that we're going to have a form that allows us to put in our first name, last name, and email address. Now I'm going to use the Lightning layout here just to kind of make it easier to work with. So pull rows. Cool. So that's just going to mean that we can set something to a width of 12 and it will pop down onto the next row for us. And if we have a Lightning layout item, and we set the size to 12, it will then style things properly. Okay, so you're going to want that 3 times. First name, last name, email. And so yeah, for these, we're just going to have a Lightning input. And it's going to be a type text for the first name. It's going to be labeled first. I do that all the time. Label first name, and we're going to have the on change to be handle first name change. And that should be it. We can add a placeholder, why not? John. Okay. And we'll mark it's required so that we have that as well. Cool. And that's what we need for that one. Now I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to copy this down for our last name. Just update the references to be correct. And then we'll put an email type one down here for awesome. So very basic input, and then we can add our footer here. we're going to just add a little bit of padding and add a couple of buttons. So yeah, we want a div here. It's not padding, a little bit of margin inside this. So ds hyphen var hyphen medium hyphen top underscore medium. I said medium, I meant margin. Voila. And then we want two buttons, one of which is going to be our save button and one of which is going to be our cancel button. So I'm just going to copy these in from elsewhere and we can talk through them quickly, save you having to watch me just type out all this type of things. So two buttons, one that's a brand one with save and one that's a default one with cancel. And we have our handle save and handle cancel. So that is pretty much that for us. Nice, and again, all this is very quick and easy stuff to deal with. And what we're going to do here is just kind of implement our handler function. So handle first name change. Whoop. Want the event. This dot first name event target value. Yep, and that's that. And then we can just duplicate this for last name and email. I know someone will be saying in the comments, you could do this with one handler and switch between the name or the ID, but yeah, we could do that. We probably should do that, but we're not doing that right now. We're just focusing on something easy for us to work with. So it's also quite nice and clear for everyone what's going on. Okay, so we now have our emails. We now have everything working. We're going to handle the cancel event. All that's going to do is that's going to call the close method on this class. And we're just going to say cancel in there, and that's it. Okay, and that is kind of the basic setup for us. So if we go back to our JavaScript file here, what we can do is just quickly import, create contact modal. Let me just make sure I've got the correct format name for it. Yeah, it's create contact modal. There we go. And then what we can do is on our, have we added the button on here? We haven't added, let's add the button on here as well for the top. So we're going to add the actions slot. So again, cards have a slot called actions. So lightning hyphen button label equals new slot equals actions and on click cool, handle new. Okay, nothing too crazy there. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to save all of this. Has this got the, it hasn't got the method called yet. Now, when working with a modal, modals are actually asynchronous events firing that we're kind of waiting for. So what we're going to do is we're going to define this as an asynchronous function. And what that means is that it's going to wait for a response back from the modal, whether that's the save result when we had success or the close result. What we're going to do is we're going to do constant result equals await. So using await kind of syntax, create contact modal.open. So again, there's an open method on there that kind of handles all of our open logic. And we can pass in some data. So we're going to do account ID. I'm going to spell account ID correctly. It's going to be this dot record ID. Awesome. And then we're going to also add in a size parameter that, you guessed it, controls the size of the modal window. So again, nothing too crazy. And that's going to be it for now. We'll kind of handle everything else in a bit. So if I hit save, that should all be tied together, and it should allow us to press the new button, have the modal pop up, and then we can press cancel. It will go back. The actual save button won't do anything at the moment. So let's go back here, refresh. Cool. So I hit our new button that's popped up. We have our modal window, and then I can hit cancel, and it will close down. Okay, and again, the same thing works with the cross button up there, cancels it out for us. So that is, again, if you haven't seen modals before, that's one of my favorite little features in Lightning Web Components when I'm building kind of products or when I'm kind of delivering things for customers out there in the wild. I like to add in modals in certain instances because it kind of keeps the page running as a single place. So big fan of modals and big fan of wizards even, where you can kind of keep the user in context and having to jump around. And one of the nice things, as I say, that Lightning has in the ability to do now is tell other things to refresh on the page as well if you want it to. Anyway, let's continue on. So the next thing we want to do is have our ability to create our record. Excuse me. So we're going to do this in a couple of steps. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to define our query for our mutation. So our mutation is still a query. So just to take a step back, and this is kind of one of those things that is sometimes a little bit lost for certain Salesforce developers, but other query languages, so SQL, you can only query things. You can do a select statement, and that is it. Okay, you are always retrieving records. You cannot do any changing of the data through SQL. That is not the same as standard SQL or as GraphQL. They allow things called mutations in GraphQL. In SQL, you can do different operations to go and update data. And so when we are doing a mutation here, we are calling it a mutation, but it is still a query we are working with. So with that, we're going to need to import our GQL and our execute mutation kind of options again from our GraphQL module. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to define a function here. There's going to be called get, and it's going to return our contact creation mutation query. Doesn't really make much difference. Okay, that is just a standard getter method, and that's going to allow us to retrieve what we need as and when. And that is going to return GQL as ever. So it's going to kind of process and do our string interpolation with GQL. And what we're going to do is we're going to start writing out our query. So our query uses the mutation keyword. Now, if we go back here, you will see that we used the query keyword. And we named the query here. We're going to name the mutation here. We're going to name it contact create mutation. Okay. And we're going to tell it, we're going to give it an input, which is going to be our contact create input. Whoops. Create input type. So let's just take a step here and just pause a minute. So input is the name of the variable of what we're going to be inputting, and contact create input with the bang here is the type. If I just pop back over here to our mutation schema, you can see here we have our account create input, which is our contact create input. And if we just nip up here to our mutation schema, so type mutation, it takes in an input parameter and it takes in that type, that UI API mutations input type. Okay, so we just need to be aware of all of the different kind of things we got going on in there. So you can see we've got account create, which has all these different options in there, account delete, account update. So let's just jump back in and let's start populating that. So we got our kind of base set up there. Say that we're doing a contact create input. We're going to call the UI API again. Okay, and we're going to go in, and you notice, just as a quick aside, there is the all or nothing flag we saw a second ago. Where is it? So all or nothing allows you to define whether everything gets inserted or nothing gets inserted if you're doing multiple items. We're not going to bother passing that in at all. We're just going to use UI API as is. And then we're going to have a contact create input type. So contact create is what would be account create here. So this input type here. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell it that the input is going to be our $input variable that we've passed up here. We could rename this if we want to do to something else, but I'd like to keep it as input just to kind of keep it easier to keep track of. But yeah, you could rename that a little bit if you want. And then what we're going to return back is just the record with its ID. Okay. Again, you could just have success passed back here. You could have additional fields if you wanted. I'm just going to pass back the record ID just for simplicity. And that is the mutation for us. So that's mutation query schema. This, as I mentioned earlier on, it took me a little bit of time to get my head around this to find out those things because it's not as clearly documented in the Lightning Web Component setup. So make sure you go and have a look at the schema for the actual GraphQL API to work with. Now, once we have that, we're going to go down here and I'm just going to have my handle save option. Now our handle save is going to be handling when we click the save button. So nothing that we're not expecting to be on there. But this is going to be using our mutation options. So we're going to first of all mark it as async because we're going to call an await function in there. And what we're going to do is we are going to do a try block. Excuse me. And in that try block, we're going to say constant result equals, and it's going to be await execute mutation. So that's calling this execute mutation function up here from our Lightning GraphQL module. And into that function, we pass in an object with all our parameters on. So we have the query, which is going to be our query that we have above. So this .contact creation query. And then we're going to tell it we have some variables. Okay. And the variable that we've defined above is called input. And that input variable has the type contact create input. Okay, so contact create input will be, where is it? Here. So that kind of representation. So it will be the object name and then an object representation or a representation of that object in JSON. That sounds far more complicated. It's key value pairs where it's the field name and then the field value. Excuse me. Okay, just going to pop in a sweet real quick to soothe my throat a touch. So with that, let's pop back over here, and we're going to pass in our contact object, and we're going to say that we have an account ID, which is going to be this account ID. We have a first name, which is going to be this first name. Last name, which is this last name. And email, capitalized properly, which will be this email. Okay, and that's all we need in there. Now that goes away, that runs, everything kind of runs through. We end that function call there with a semicolon, and then assuming that works, we're just going to close it with success. Okay, you could pass back the record ID. One of the nice things about these modals is you can pass back record IDs and things. So let's just do that. Let's just put back the, let's just leave it success for now. Let's not cause ourselves more headaches than we need right now. And then finally, let's catch any errors. Let's not use square brackets. And we'll just do console error. Okay, again, real world, have some better error handling. But this is our save function kind of working end to end. We're not using the result here because we're not going to do too much processing with it, but you could pass back the ID if you wanted to, or pass back the result with the record ID or part of that. Now, that works perfectly fine for us. The last thing we're going to do is go back over here, and we have our result come back, which is going to be the success message. Okay, so if it all works properly, we either get back success or cancel. Okay, so we're either going to get back success here, or if it does error, we could do this dot close, and we could do cancel. We could just call handle cancel even. Okay, so and that would call and return this dot cancel. So we're either going to get cancel or success back as our returns here. So what we can do is say if this dot result is equal to success. Remember I mentioned that refresh option we had earlier on here, which we got down here, and we've stored in there. We can then call this dot. We're going to return it, in fact, because it's asynchronous. And voila. And I'm just going to make sure that it's happy with the kind of return here, because we're not returning anything by just saying return. Okay, and that should kill that off. I'll just return null for now. Okay, so we're not returning anything in particular. I'm going to save that. That should go up there. And now we should, I'm going to go back here. And we should be able to add a new contact and it show up for us. So if we go new, oh, what have I broken in my HTML? Lightning item layout, multiple rows equals true. Rows, not row. It's always a single letter that throws you off, eh? That's much better. So we're going to create, let's create boat face b.mcb at example.com, and then when we hit save, it should go away and run for us. Now, has it done the refresh? It hasn't done the refresh for us. So there was a problem there that's occurred. So let's have a think. Why might that have been? If we refresh the page, has it created the record is question number 1. So the record was created. Okay, that is great. What is not happening is the refresh. So if we have a look here on our contact list, we're using this dot result. It should just be result. That was me typing too quickly. So just go back in, refresh this, and do it again. And we'll do, let's just do Peter as he's not here. Peter Chittum. And voila, you can see it's refreshed and loaded in our new record. So what's happened there is once we've done our method, we called that refresh function and it goes away, excuse me, and it will rerun that wire function to see if the data has changed and pull it down and update our list for us. One of the interesting things is obviously because it's just pulling it down as it comes, notice that it popped it in any order it wants. So you probably want some sort of order by on there, different items on the query to help manage that. But that's kind of a nice little end-to-end of how you can use GraphQL. So GraphQL also allows you a few other options on there. We're not going to go into these today. As you can hear, my throat's starting to go, so we're going to wrap it up in a second. But you can also do updating a record. In fact, let me go down to these examples here. So we've done creating a record here. Note that the Salesforce examples here all have hard-coded values, which are not very helpful. Have a look at the one that we've got there for going through that. You can do an update of a record. So it's nice in there. You can use kind of updates to pass the information. This one does actually use variables, which is far more useful. Again, make sure you're using the right types here. Okay, use the right name there for the action. And you can also call delete, again, pass in the contact delete, and you can pass in an ID. It only takes an ID for deletion. Other thing to note is that this link does not work as well. I've reported that to Salesforce. So there are some good examples in here of using GraphQL. However, mutations is not one of them. I don't know whether that's just waiting for them to release that in the coming week or so once there is Spring 26 out, or coming couple of weeks. But yeah, that is GraphQL kind of at a high level end to end. It's a very useful piece of kit. As I say, definitely recommend using it. There's things here as well you can look at, like pagination. I had an example recently where I was using, pagination and cursors to load in 10 records at a time. This is something that would be really good for you to do here as an example. What this does is this returns cursors for you to utilize, and then you can go away and retrieve the next using kind of the next button. Okay, so when the next button comes on, what you would do, there's a really good example here in the LWC recipes. So what you do is when you want to go to next page, you check to see if you have a next page returned. You then set the after, and then you go through and it updates it. Okay, and by using after as one of your variables, it's reactive. So when that changes, all of these variables change down as well, and it will update through and run and update your query. So it's very easy to do, very nice and simple. And again, if you're working with lots of different data types, it's a good way of working through it. The other thing I'm going to show you here quickly is on the query records. So you can do aggregate queries as well. Excuse me, if you want to run an aggregate query. But where are we? Query objects. It is query objects. So there's some examples here. So you query multiple objects is what we're looking for. So here you can run a single query that gets account, case, contact, and opportunity all in one. Some of it's where it's using the data from above, okay, and others where it's using different bits of information as you want. There's a lot of stuff you can do with GraphQL to get different bits of data. There's also here a really good discussion as to when to use it. So again, if you're wanting to minimize number of requests, if you're able to query exact objects and fields, and if you want to paginate or you want to get related records from a parent record, it's a good option for you. Whereas if you're getting a single record, Lightning Data Service is the best way to go. So hopefully you found that a useful little instruction and walk through GraphQL and how some of that works. Thank you for joining me today. Apologies, it's a slightly shorter session, and then I had a bit of a sore throat all the way through. But I wanted to make sure that we did a stream before the end of January to kick off 2026. So thank you everyone for joining. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments below if there's something in particular you'd like to see on the next episode for me and Pete, or in a future episode. Drop us a like if you have enjoyed it, and remember to subscribe to stay up to date for any future ones. And with that, have a great weekend, and I'll see you all on the next one.